and his career as this famous writer. And hello? Me too. Drags other planet. Ma'am. Hey everyone, my name is Ryan and I'm back with my January wrap-up. So I read a total of 15 books in January, and because there's so many, I'm not going to go into as much detail with some as I will with others, but I have a lot to talk about, so let's get into it. The first book I read of the year was Dear Ijuwele by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. This is essentially a really short manifesto of suggestions of how to raise a child to be feminist. I thought this book was a really interesting read. The thing that I really enjoyed about it was that the author, I believe, is Nigerian, or she's writing to a Nigerian woman. So we're getting the perspective of how feminism and gender norms are looked at in Nigerian culture. And I thought that was really interesting and important to read because I feel like a lot of times with feminist books or books of that nature, they tend to be very American-centric or Eurocentric, so it's interesting to see a perspective from a non-European or American culture. Aside from that, the thing about this book for me is that I think it's very much a feminist book for beginners. I would definitely recommend this book for someone who doesn't read a lot of nonfiction, or for someone who doesn't know a lot about feminist theory, or for really new parents themselves looking to raise a feminist child. This book is really short and has really good suggestions like not letting the mother be the sole caretaker of the child and having the father co-parent as well, because both parents signed up to have the child, so both parents should be responsible. And not having certain things be girls' toys or girls' actions and boys' toys or boys' actions, and letting the child explore the toys and the things that they want to do on their own. So we get a lot of really good information in here. It's just that for me, none of this was really things that I'd never heard before, right? Which is why I think it would be a really good book for beginners in feminist theory and things like that. Overall, I decided not to rate it just because I don't particularly like rating books that I read for education purposes, so I left it without a rating. And the next book that I read was Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds. This is a novel in verse about a boy whose brother has just been killed, and it follows the next 60 seconds as he is basically deciding whether or not to go out and find his brother's killer and take revenge. This book has heavy trigger warnings for gun violence, gang violence, and death of a family member, so if you are sensitive to any of those things, I would suggest staying away from this book. But overall, this book was a very emotional, thought-provoking, powerful read. It talked a lot about the circumstances of growing up in the environment that he has grown up with that led to this happening, and the culture surrounding taking revenge and continuing the cycle. And this book is just about him being confronted with the fact that it's up to him to break the cycle, and it's his decision. Overall, I really enjoyed it. I would very much recommend it, and I rated it 4 stars. And the next book that I have is The Wife by Meg Wolitzer. This book is about a woman who sort of at the end of her life is realizing that she wants to divorce her husband. And the book kind of follows her entire relationship with him from when they met when she was a student at college and he was her writing professor, and it follows them through like the 50s, the 60s, and all the way up through his writing career and their relationship, and it goes into her role in his life. I had issues with this book. I know this book is very beloved, but I don't think that I'm really the right audience for it. This book talks a lot about what a wife's role in her husband's life is, and her as the glue that holds the family together, and just her as this important figure. And I get that, and I get why that would be empowering for a lot of women and for a lot of people. I just didn't find it so for me. I had a lot of issues with her husband's behavior as a whole, and I know that was kind of the point of her staying with him despite all of his flaws. I just don't think it was right for me. Overall, I can definitely see why a lot of people would really like this book. I just didn't, so I gave it a 2.5 stars. All right, and the next book that I have is In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. I actually have a video where I talk about this book at length, so I will link that on the screen and you should watch it because I love this book. This book is a memoir following a queer woman in her abusive relationship and what that was like, and she is essentially using metaphors and critical analyses of media to set up the relationship as the dream house. I talked about this in my video, but this was a very difficult emotional read for me, but I absolutely loved this book, and I loved all the things that it had to say on domestic abuse and queer abuse and how queer people are viewed in society. And I just thought it was also very well written, and I loved everything that this book said, and I just loved it, and I gave it 5 stars. The next book that I read was The Henna Wars by Adiba Jagirdar. This is a YA sapphic contemporary romance about these two girls who decide to start rival henna businesses in school as a project, and over the course of the book, they fall in love. That being said, this book is so much more than that because this book covers cultural appropriation and who gets to use things that belong to certain cultures. And what does it mean when someone who is not of that culture decides to do it? We get a lot of discussions on different cultures because one of the girls, I think, is from Bangladesh and the other girl is Black and Brazilian. We also get a lot of discussions on coming out and how hard it is to come out when your culture isn't accepting of queer people. I also loved the family element. We have a sister who is really present and supportive in our main character's life, and we get parents who may not be understanding all of the time, but they try their best and they are looking out for their kid. Overall, I loved this book, and I thought that not only was it a sweet, light-hearted romance, it also had really important things to say, and I loved it, and I gave it 4 stars. And the next book that I have is Angus, Thongs, and Full Frontal Snogging by Louise Renison, and this is the first book in the Georgia Nicholson series. I understand that a lot of people grew up with this series, and I can totally see why people would have a lot of love for it. For me, I just think I missed out on the craze for these books. It's not that I regret reading it or anything, I don't, but I know I'm not the target audience for this, and I think for books like these, sometimes it's hard to really love them when you don't have the childhood nostalgia for them. This was funny and full of just like quirky, melodramatic, preteen girl humor, so I can definitely see why these are popular. It wasn't my thing when I was a preteen, and it's still not my thing now, but I tried it, and that's the important part. So I did end up rating this 2.5 stars, right in the middle, not disliking it, but not really liking it either. Hello? And the next book that I read is Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo. I actually have a vlog on my channel of my reading of this book, so I will also link that on the screen. This is a very popular YA fantasy series about a girl who is an orphan, and she discovers that she has magic powers, so she goes off and gets taken to live with these magical people called the Grishas, and it's kind of a world that's based in sort of like Russian history and folklore. I enjoyed this. Yeah, I liked the characters, I liked the magic, I liked the world. So I think this is also just very much a first book in the series, but that the series does have room to grow for me. So I can't wait to continue with the series, but I did end up giving this first book 3 stars. And the next book that I have is An Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir. This is another really popular YA fantasy series about a girl who lives in sort of this martial empire where the government is everything and they control everything, and it kind of has this like Roman type of vibe for me. But at the start of the book, the girl's brother is taken by the Empire and imprisoned, so the girl then joins the resistance to infiltrate the Empire as a slave. On her undercover mission, she meets one of the Empire's most promising soldiers, but unbeknownst to everyone around him, he is not faithful to the Empire and he doesn't believe in them and he wants to desert. When these two meet, then the story kind of goes off from there. I actually kind of feel the same way about this as I do with Shadow and Bone, where I think it's just very much the first book in a series, setting up the characters, setting up the plot, setting up the world, and I think this is going to be something that will grow with each book in the series, so I really want to continue, but I don't really have very many attachments to anything right now. I'm excited to see how the story and the characters grow with this, and I think I actually did like this one a little bit more than Shadow and Bone, so I gave this one a 3.5 stars. Next up, I read Coraline by Neil Gaiman. This is a children's or middle grade horror book about a girl named Coraline who disappears into this other world in a wall in her house, essentially, where she finds this world parallel to her own and meets her other mother and other neighbors and other family, and everything takes off from there. I liked this book. I enjoyed the spooky elements. It wasn't that scary, but it was more kind of just like eerie or creepy type of feeling. I liked our main character of Coraline and how she's independent and she's stubborn, but she does learn lessons along the way. And I thought it was interesting because I have seen the movie before, and as I was reading the book, I was seeing kind of the imagery of the movie play out in my head. But that being said, I still do think that this book was kind of meandering a little bit, and honestly, I kind of like the experience of watching the movie a little bit more. So I ended up giving this book 3 stars. Next, I read Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret by Judy Blume. I expected this to be a really similar situation to Angus Thongs and Full Frontal Snogging, where I just didn't have the childhood nostalgia for it, so then I wasn't going to get into it. But I was wrong. I actually really did enjoy this. This book is about a girl who moves out of New York to New Jersey for the first time with her parents, and one of her parents is Catholic and one of her parents is Jewish, and she's kind of struggling figuring out between the two religions which one she really fits in with, and the whole story is kind of her figuring out the point of religion in general. This character, I believe, is also like 11 or 12, so we get a lot of things in the story about being in school and starting at a new school and just being a kid and learning about puberty and sex for the first time. So there were some like lighter or funnier moments to this as well. I really enjoyed what this book had to say. I think it has a really huge theme of the child really exploring their own path and deciding what their faith means for them instead of it being put upon them by the parents. I also liked that this book explored puberty and periods and bras in a way that wasn't shameful or anything. Even though I didn't grow up reading this book still had a lot of that nostalgic factor just because it really pulled to a lot of experience that I myself had when I was that age. Are you okay? I thought this book had a lot of really important things to say, but was also really enjoyable and funny, and I just really liked it, so I gave it 4 stars. Next up, I read the first 2 volumes of Saga by Brian K. Vaughan, and by the time this video comes out, I will have read the 3rd one as well. This is an adult sci-fi graphic novel series about these 2 warring planets where one's kind of this like old-fashioned magical type of planet and the other one is more kind of like new technology type of planet, and a soldier from the technology planet and her prisoner from the magical planet escape and have a baby together. And this entire series is basically going through the baby's life as she is growing up with all of these people trying to hunt down this family and growing up during this planetary war. I've read this series before. This was a reread for me, and I will be continuing to read the rest of this series in the coming months. But this is one of my all-time favorite graphic novel series. I will say there are really graphic, on page, in full color depictions of sex, nudity, gore, violence, and just things like that. So if you are not interested in those things, I would stay away from the series. But the series is fun, fast-paced, and stressful because things are always going wrong for these characters. Rereading the series is also a really interesting experience because I can also kind of pick out where foreshadowing plays in and where threads at the beginning of the series were set up to establish things that happen later on in the series that I didn't realize on my first read. Overall, I loved the volumes of the series that I've read so far just as much as I did the first time around, and I rated each of them 5 stars. And the next book that I have, I'm actually still currently working through, but by the time this video comes out, I will have finished it, and that is Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. This is a book about a girl named Bree who goes to college after her mother unexpectedly dies in order to kind of escape her grief, but then gets wrapped up in this magical society, and the magic and her mother's death are connected in ways that she never expected, and the story kind of takes off from there. This book is so cool, right? I'm not done with it yet as of filming this video, but I'm enjoying it very much. It feels like an old nostalgic YA series, but sort of revamped and made fresh and new. I was a little skeptical at first because the magic in here is very much based around sort of King Arthur type of stuff, and that stuff's never really been my thing, so I thought I wouldn't really get it, but it's really easy to understand, and I think it's really cool. I also like the real world discussions that we get because Bree talks a lot about her experience growing up as a Black woman in North Carolina and how that impacts her life and how she's typically the only or one of very few people of color in a white-dominated space. I also like what this book has to say about colonization. Magic in this world is sort of this natural substance, but there are people and certain magical societies that steal it and use it for themselves. And I think the discussion of how different cultures look at the magic and how there's actual real consequences for taking things that aren't yours, and we see how that impacts a culture. This book is also very fun. There's monsters, there's lovable characters, there's a romance in here, and there's also several diverse characters. We get Bree's experience being a Black woman. There's also a non-binary side character, and there's also several queer characters in here as well. Overall, I'm not done with it yet, but this book is very fast, very fun. I'm liking all the characters, and it's just a new, fresh take on urban fantasy stories that we've seen before. And like I said, I'm not done with it, but as of right now where I am, I'm leaning towards giving it 4 stars. And the final book that I have is another book that I'm actually still in the middle of, but again, by the time this video comes out and by the time the end of the month comes, I will have finished it. And that is Across the Green Grass Fields by Seanan McGuire. This is the most recent and I think the 6th installment in the Wayward Children series. I've talked about this series before. I think it's my favorite fantasy series right now, and it's basically about different portal fantasy worlds. This book in particular follows a girl who disappears into a horse type world where everything's based around horse-like mythical creatures like centaurs and unicorns and things like that. This is a book for the horse girls. I've said it before and I'll say it again, the books in this series feel like classic fairy tales for adults to me, and that does not change with this book. I'm loving this book so far, and I like a lot of the real world themes that this book has to say, especially about there not being a right or wrong way to be a girl, and about what real true friends look like. Something else I really enjoy about the series is that so far all of the books have had queer characters in them. This book in particular follows an intersex character. And the other thing that I really love about this series is that these portal worlds are all so different to each other. Like I said, this one talks about horse creatures, but another world is basically Candyland, and another world is the Goblin Market, and another world is like the underworld, and there's a Gothic-inspired world, and they're all very different and all have very unique rules and customs for how they work, and different cultures that live in these worlds, but they all make sense. I love reading these books because I never know what I'm going to get when I get into them, but they still feel like coming home. I haven't finished this book yet. I'm about halfway through, but I'm leaning towards a 4-star rating for right now, but when I'm editing this video, I'll update you on what it actually is. And yeah, this is just another fun installment to my favorite series, and I'm really enjoying it. So yeah, that's all the books that I read or am in the process of reading for January. But that is all that I have for you today. Hopefully I'll see you again with another video soon. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and don't forget to smile. Bye!